Today, the term Philistine is often used to describe someone who is seen as uncultured or boorish. But, it has its origins in a group of people who played a pivotal role in the Old Testament of the Bible. For those familiar with the Old Testament, the Philistines are remembered as early antagonists of the Israelites. However, the relationship between these two groups was far more complex than mere antagonism, and their history deserves a closer look. The Philistines and Israelites found themselves on opposing sides of the battlefield for a variety of reasons, some more apparent than others. Both groups established their kingdoms in the Levant, the region roughly corresponding to modern-day Palestine, Israel, and Lebanon, during the early Iron Age. This period followed the collapse of the Bronze Age system around 1200 BC and marked the emergence of new conflicts. One of the fundamental causes of tension between the Philistines and the Israelites was rooted in culture. The Philistines migrated to the Levant from the Aegean and brought with them a religion that differed significantly from that of the Israelites and even their Canaanite neighbors. The Philistines were known for their aggressive and expansionist nature, which would ultimately become the primary driver of their conflicts with the Israelites. As the Philistines extended their influence throughout the region, their expansion led to a collision with the Israelites in the 11th century BC. This clash initiated a series of wars that spanned nearly a century, ultimately determining which group would establish dominance in the region. The historical significance of the Philistines wasn't verified until the 19th century. After the Enlightenment of the 18th century, scholars began showing increased interest in the peoples of the Bible and the lands mentioned in biblical texts. Many scholars focused on the ancient cultures of the Near East, which had written languages and left behind tangible monuments. However, a select group of specialists turned their attention to the biblical peoples, even though they lacked these enduring traces. During the late 19th century, two French Egyptologists, François Chabas and Gaston Maspero, utilized their developing archaeological techniques to investigate the geographical and ethnic origins of the Philistines. These two scholars proposed a theory that is now widely accepted by Near Eastern experts. The Philistines originally hailed from the Aegean region of the Mediterranean Sea and were likely Indo-European. This theory was grounded in the discovery of Philistine pottery in the Levant, which closely resembled Aegean pottery from the late Bronze Age. The specifics of the Philistines' arrival in the Levant remain unclear due to their lack of a written language at that time. However, archaeological findings and Egyptian records provide a general overview of their migration. Most contemporary scholars believe that the Philistines were part of a wave of migratory peoples known collectively as the Sea Peoples. These groups played a role in the end of the Bronze Age and were behind the second wave of migrations and invasions that targeted Egypt during the reign of Ramses III. Although Ramses successfully repelled the invasion and took many Sea Peoples captive, the Philistines were pushed to the coastal region of the southern Levant, settling there after 1177 BC. In Egypt, the Philistines were known as the Pelset, which eventually evolved into Philistine. This term became associated with the southern Levant, known today as Palestine. What makes the Philistines particularly intriguing is that once they reached the Levant, their connection to the Aegean gradually diminished. While archaeological evidence indicates that they initially carried some of their Aegean cultural traditions with them, the presence of native Canaanite pottery and other material cultures suggests that they adapted swiftly to their new environment. Their ability to blend Aegean and Canaanite traditions and people into their growing political structure has led modern scholars to describe the Philistines as a hybrid culture, which combined their native Aegean heritage with Canaanite elements. In this ancient tale of conflict, the Philistines and Israelites took center stage in a rivalry that would echo through history. The roots of this enmity ran deep, with cultural differences, territorial ambitions, and divine symbols fueling the fire. The political structure of the Philistine society was far from conventional. Rather than a unified nation-state or kingdom, the Philistines were bound together in a confederation of 5 leading cities: Ashdod, Gath, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gaza, collectively referred to as the Pentapolis. These cities each had their own leader, known as a Seranim, a term likely connected to the Indo-European word Tarwanis and the classical Greek word Tyrannus. These local chieftains set the agenda within their cities, but they came together to make collective decisions when war was on the horizon. While it remains unclear which city held the most significant role, the Old Testament book of Samuel 6:16 suggests that Ekron was considered the leading Philistine city, at least in the eyes of the Israelites. By the mid-11th century BC, the Philistine Confederation had grown powerful enough to expand its influence from the coast into the eastern and northern regions, encroaching on Israelite territory. This expansion led to violent clashes between the Philistines and Israelites. The Philistines initially dominated the scene, with the Book of Judges even referencing them as rulers over the Israelites. The Philistine ascendancy continued, occasionally interrupted by Israelite attempts at rebellion. The decisive battle took place at Aphek, an encounter that would significantly shape the geopolitics of the Levant for the following decades. According to some data, the Philistines defeated the Israelites, capturing the Ark of the Covenant and all of their iron weapons between 1060 and 1050 BC. The Philistine dominance continued for over half a century until King David's rule, which marked the unification of Israel and Judah. David managed to drive the Philistines from Israelite territory in 980 BC. Aside from the quest for land and dominance, cultural conflicts played a role in the tensions between the Philistines and Israelites. One notable instance is detailed in I Samuel after the Philistines defeated the Israelite army and seized the Ark of the Covenant, first taking it to Ashdod and then to Gath before eventually returning it to the Israelites. In the ancient Near East, most settled communities housed a statue of their primary deity within the deity's temple. These statues, referred to as cult statues, were typically only viewed by high priests and were often targeted by invading forces. For instance, the more militaristic societies, like the Assyrians, would seize their enemies' cult statues as both mementos and psychological weapons. The Ark of the Covenant held the same significance to the Israelites as a cult statue, which explains why the writers of the Old Testament portrayed the Philistines and their principal god, Dagon, with such disdain after they captured this sacred relic. Dagon is a somewhat enigmatic figure in the Philistine pantheon, but modern scholars believe he represented a male variant of an Indo-European earth goddess. Importantly, the Old Testament never mentions renegade Israelites worshipping Dagon. The Philistines and their entire culture were viewed with hostility by the Israelites. The enmity between the Philistines and Israelites is well documented throughout various books and passages in the Old Testament. Multiple factors contributed to this long-standing rivalry, including distinct cultural origins, differing religious beliefs, and the mutual desire to exert political control over the Levant. These disparities fueled the intensity of their conflicts, leading to violent confrontations. The Philistines initially had the upper hand, but the Israelites would emerge as the dominant force by the early 10th century BC. Ultimately, both groups met their downfall when the powerful Assyrian Empire swept through the Levant, reducing them to vassal states.